On September 4th, 1814, Jean Lafitte bought time in two languages. To Lockyer, he asked for a fortnight. To Blanc, he called it 15 days. To Louisiana's governor, he asked for oblivion. Not loyalty, oblivion. The document that later made Lafitte look like a patriot was written as a bargain. Armed service for legal erasure. The question is not whether the Baratarians fought for New Orleans. Some did. The question is what the United States bought when it pardoned them. This episode is about that transaction, not Lafitte's whole life, not the romance that grew around his name. The case is narrower and stranger. The moment a smuggling network the government had tried to destroy became useful enough to forgive. The core question is simple. When Jean Lafitte offered his men to Andrew Jackson's side in 1814, was this a conversion story, or was it a political deal made under military pressure? Start with the place. Barataria was not a tavern legend. It was a working corridor south of New Orleans. Bayous, passes, barrier islands, shallow water, hidden approaches, and channels that mattered because ships could move where officials could not easily follow. Grande Terre and the Barataria passes sat close enough to threaten New Orleans, but far enough from the city to make enforcement expensive. That geography produced a business. The Baratarians carried privateering papers from foreign revolutions, took prizes under flags that gave them a legal vocabulary, and sold goods into Louisiana markets where the same merchants who condemned smuggling often bought from it. The line between privateering, smuggling, and piracy was not a line on the water. It was a line drawn after the cargo reached land. The United States had reasons to hate the operation. It cut around customs duties. It trafficked in goods the government wanted taxed or barred. It also included the smuggling of enslaved people into a region where federal law had already made importation illegal. That sentence has to stay in the room. The pardon did not touch only men who moved cloth, coffee, powder, and captured vessels. It also touched men connected to the illegal movement of human beings. If legal erasure sounds clean, that is because legal language is good at cleaning the table. The cost is still there. The record does not need Lafitte to be a romantic outlaw. It shows a profitable illegal network operating inside a weak frontier state. Governor William C. Claiborne had already moved against the Baratarians. Federal and state authorities had watched the operation for years. By 1814, Commodore Daniel Patterson had orders to break it. Pierre Lafitte, Jean's brother and business partner, was in prison in New Orleans. The government had pressure on the network, and the network had pressure on the government. Then the British arrived. In late August 1814, British officers at Pensacola began looking toward Louisiana. To them, Barataria was not colorful, it was useful. If the British could buy the passes, the vessels, and the local knowledge of the Baratarians, they could open a door toward New Orleans. On August 30th, Lieutenant Colonel Edward Nichols wrote to Lafitte or to the commandant at Barataria. He offered rank in British service, protection of property and person, and land after the war. Captain William Henry Percy sent instructions through Nicholas Lockyer, commander of the sloop Sophia, the name printed in Latour's appendix. The terms were practical: stop attacking Spain and British allies, place Baratarian vessels under British orders, and help the campaign. That is the first paper in the case. It does not ask Lafitte to become a symbol. It asks him to become an asset. On September 3rd, Lockyer reached Barataria under a flag of truce. The next day, Lafitte answered him. He did not refuse. He asked for time. The letter said confusion in the camp had prevented an immediate answer, and that a fortnight would let him put his affairs in order. He told Lockyer he would be entirely at your disposal at the end of that delay. Read alone, that sentence looks like betrayal. Read with the rest of the packet, it looks like leverage. That same day, Lafitte sent the British papers toward New Orleans through Jean Blanc, a member of the Louisiana legislature. He told Blanc that the British offer had been placed in his hands. He admitted that he may have evaded customs duties. He insisted that he had never stopped being a good citizen. He also named the private pressure behind the public offer. Pierre Lafitte, his brother, was in jail. This is the first place where the patriotic version becomes too clean. Lafitte's letter to Blanc uses patriotic language. It says his adopted country had not ceased to be dear to him. But the same letter asked Blanc to use influence for Pierre. It is a plea, a warning, and a negotiation in the same envelope. Then Lafitte wrote directly to Governor Claiborne. The phrasing matters. He offered to restore to Louisiana several citizens who, in the governor's eyes, may have lost that title. He offered them ready to defend the country. He called the position he occupied important in the crisis. Then he named the price. The only reward he asked was an act of oblivion for all that had been done before. An act of oblivion. That is the phrase the episode turns on. It was not a medal. It was not a public embrace. It was legal erasure. Lafitte did not say, "Trust me because I am innocent." He gave a different argument. If the state had known the nature of his offenses, he said, he would appear less guilty. If legal prizes could have entered Louisiana ports, he said, he would not have used the illicit means that caused him to be proscribed. This is an astonishing defense. Lafitte does not deny the smuggling problem. He turns it into a complaint about law and access. He says the illegal channel existed because the legal channel would not receive his prizes. That is not the language of sudden conversion. It is the language of a businessman asking a government to admit that enforcement had failed. Claiborne had the letters. The state had the warning. But the Navy raid already in motion did not stop. On September 16, 1814, American forces attacked Grande Terre. The raid captured vessels and goods and forced the Lafittes and their associates into hiding. From the state's point of view, this was enforcement. From the military point of view, it also closed one door the British had hoped to buy. But enforcement did not end the case. It changed the bargaining position. The Baratarians lost their base. The British were still coming. New Orleans was not ready to treat local knowledge as a luxury. The passes, bayous, artillerymen, powder, flints, boatmen, and pilots mattered because the United States was defending a city whose own approaches were hard to read. Andrew Jackson reached New Orleans in December. He did not arrive as Lafitte's admirer. The sources preserve the distance between the general's language and his later use of the men. Jackson had called the Baratarians a hellish banditti. That phrase is not a small obstacle in the story. It is the point. The men did not become respectable first. They became useful first. On December 17th, Claiborne announced a pardon arrangement for Baratarians who volunteered their service. Jean Lafitte, Pierre Lafitte, several Baratarian captains, and hundreds of others took the deal. The numbers vary by account, and the exact influence of their service at the Battle of New Orleans is debated. But the core fact is not debated. American leaders accepted aid from men they had recently treated as criminals. The decision was not sentimental. It was strategic. Jackson needed men who knew the region. He needed artillery skill. He needed supplies. He needed the city to hold long enough for the British assault to fail. The Baratarians needed legal protection, the release of pressure, and a path back into the markets from which they had been cut off. On January 8, 1815, at Chalmette, the British attack broke against Jackson's line. The American victory became national memory almost immediately. Jackson's report named the scale of the British defeat and the firmness of his own men. Later accounts folded many groups into the victory story: regulars, militia, free men of color, Choctaw allies, sailors, Marines, volunteers, and the Baratarians. The record supports Baratarian participation. It does not support turning them into the single explanation for the battle. That distinction matters because the myth needs a clean hinge. It needs Lafitte to reject Britain, choose America, and redeem himself in one dramatic turn. The papers are less clean. They show a man with British terms in one hand and a request for American pardon in the other. Here is the myth vs. record beat. The national version says loyalty solved the problem. The records say a pardon did. Lafitte's September 4th letter does not ask Claiborne to recognize his pure patriotism. It asks for an act of oblivion. Madison's February 6th proclamation does not say the government discovered the Baratarians had always been innocent. It pardons offenses against revenue, trade, navigation, and foreign commerce before January 8th for those tied to New Orleans, Barataria, and the adjacent places, provided they had aided the defense. That is not a love letter to loyalty. It is a conditional settlement. The pardon is the second anchor document in the case. President James Madison issued it on February 6, 1815. Its language is broad and careful. It also uses moral language. The proclamation speaks of sincere penitence, courage and fidelity, and generous forgiveness. That rhetoric matters. The federal government wanted the pardon to read as mercy earned by wartime conduct. But the mechanism is not mercy alone. The proclamation names offenses against acts of Congress touching revenue, trade, navigation, intercourse, and commerce with foreign nations. It applies to offenses before the 8th day of January. It covers inhabitants of New Orleans and nearby country, and inhabitants of Barataria and adjacent places. It requires a certificate from the governor stating that the claimant aided in the defense during the invasion. That certificate requirement is the hinge. The pardon was not simply, "you fought, so all is forgiven." It turned military usefulness into documentary proof. To receive the legal erasure, a claimant had to be made legible by the state. This is the pardon ledger. On one side, men the government had pursued for smuggling and illegal commerce. On the other, men whose service could be certified because the city needed them. The line between the two was not morality. It was paperwork after a military emergency. That is why the aftermath refuses the redemption story. After the war, the pardon created a business opportunity. The goods and vessels taken at Grande Terre became claims. The same operation the government had raided now had a route to recover property. The National Park Service summary puts the number near $500,000 in goods reclaimed from the U.S. Navy. The exact figure needs careful handling, but the direction is clear. The strategic victory against Barataria became a financial disappointment for American authorities, and Lafitte did not become a settled citizen who left the trade. He later returned to smuggling at Galveston Island in Spanish Texas. From 1817 until about 1820, Galveston became another base of privateering and illicit commerce. Modern summaries differ in detail, and some parts of Lafitte's later life remain uncertain. But the broad pattern is secure enough. The pardon did not end the business model. It moved. That is the part the heroic version has to soften. If Lafitte's 1814 decision was pure patriotic conversion, the Galveston years are an awkward epilogue. If the 1814 decision was a strategic bargain, the Galveston years make sense. Lafitte had chosen the side most likely to control Louisiana after the war, protected his brother and associates where he could, and bought a legal reset at the exact moment the United States needed what Barataria had. This is not to say the Baratarians did nothing important. They did. Their skills, supplies, and local knowledge mattered. Their decision not to aid the British mattered. Their service in the campaign mattered enough for Madison to pardon them and for Louisiana authorities to certify service. But importance is not the same as loyalty, and service is not the same as transformation. The deal worked because each side had something the other lacked. Lafitte had people, vessels, knowledge of the coast, supplies, and leverage from the British approach. The United States had the one thing he could not counterfeit: legal forgiveness. That makes the case political. Not political in the modern party sense. Political in the older, harder sense. A state under pressure deciding which crimes it can punish, which crimes it can postpone, and which offenders can be turned into instruments. Claiborne's problem was not that he misunderstood Lafitte. Jackson's problem was not that he suddenly loved the Baratarians. Madison's problem was not that the law had changed its mind about smuggling. The problem was that New Orleans had to be defended first. So the state split the question in two. Before January 8th, the Baratarians were offenders. After January 8th, if they could prove useful service, they became pardonable offenders. Not innocent men, not national saints, pardonable men. That is a much more interesting story than the old one, because it keeps the cost in view. Barataria's economy did not exist outside Louisiana society. It depended on buyers, brokers, officials who could be evaded or influenced, and a market that wanted cheap goods. It depended on waterways the state did not fully command. It depended on the illegal movement of people and property through a region where law arrived slower than profit. The pardon did not destroy that structure. It admitted for one crisis that the structure could be used. Look again at the September 4th papers. The British offer tried to buy Barataria's geography. Lafitte's delay letter bought time. The letter to Blanc tried to buy influence. The letter to Claiborne asked to buy legal memory. Jackson's acceptance bought military capacity. Madison's proclamation bought closure. Every document is a price list. That is why the case should not be flattened into a loyalty fable. The archive does not show a simple sinner becoming a patriot. It shows a smuggler reading the military map correctly and a government reading its own weakness clearly enough to make a bargain it could later celebrate as virtue. There is one more caution. The record does not let us see inside Lafitte's mind. It does not prove he felt no attachment to Louisiana. It does not prove he acted only from money. His letters use the language of country, citizenship, and conscience, and those words may have mattered to him. But the documents also show what he asked for. He asked for the pressure to stop. He asked for his adherence to be restored. He asked for all that had been done before to be covered by oblivion. Then after the state accepted the bargain, the business did not disappear. It reappeared on another coast. That is enough. Lafitte's case did not turn because loyalty converted a smuggler. It turned because a government with a weak frontier found a cheaper instrument than enforcement, a pardon ledger. The Battle of New Orleans made the bargain famous. Madison's proclamation made it legal. Galveston showed what the bargain had not changed. The legend remembers the flag Lafitte stood near. The record remembers the price.